to order. We have minutes to approve, quite a few actually, and I asked City Clerk Marty Rebine if she would read off all the dates. I think we have like 5 meetings worth of minutes to approve.
Okay. Before we go there, I just wanted to mention that Mr. Haynes, Mr. Jaffe, and is it Mr. O'Haran?
Yes.
Are absent. And the sets of minutes that we have to approve are those from August 29th, September 5th, September 12th, September 24th, and I guess October 1st are not quite yet available. So,
thank you. Are there any changes or corrections to those minutes? Seeing none, they're approved. Do we have any public comment on items not on the agenda? All right, I don't see any, so we'll get right to our item, our one item. Thank you, Rod Austin of the Downtown Association, for helping set this up. Do you want to introduce our speaker?
I will do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to try to be quick because he's going to fill up that hour pretty easily. I can't let it go without making a couple comments, if you know me. And I have them written down. When we look at all the planning that Missoula has done over the last decade or so, this analysis should be very interesting and revealing. Envision Missoula, LUFTA, and the Greater Downtown Master Plan all focus on a denser city center. These plans are all approved, but yet we have yet to really look at what changes need to be made to make that happen. Mr. Minicozzi's work will give us a tool and a reason to make those difficult decisions ahead of us that involve zoning, parking, densities per acre, building heights, and bus service, to name a few. This analysis will be foundational to fulfilling the promise of our planning. I'm glad to, or happy to, introduce Joe Minicozzi. He's the AICP. I think that has something to do with being an architect. Is the former executive director of the Asheville Downtown Association in Asheville, North Carolina. He also works with Public Interest Projects, Inc., a private for-profit real estate development company focused on historic preservation, urban infill, and investing in business startups in downtown Asheville. Joe is a founding member of the Asheville Design Center, a nonprofit dedicated to creating livable communities across western North Carolina. He received his Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Miami and Master's in Architecture and Urban Design from Harvard University. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joe.
Thanks, Rod. And thank you all for having me here. I'm going to go pretty quickly through a lot of stuff. I'll try to, if you have questions, I'm going to hold them to the end. There's some things that are going to be pretty detailed that I'll just, I'll let you know what I'm going to leave behind. Everything, basically all of this is going to be left behind for Rod and Ellen to go through, and some of this stuff is pretty detailed. But what we have here before you, this is a picture of Asheville, pretty much this time of year, what it looks like in the fall when the fog settles into the mountains, and you can see why they call it the Smoky Mountains to be in that area, and that's mostly due to the precipitation. Let's see here. So one of the lessons I want to put up front about cities is that cities to me are like DNA, like human DNA, and that's the way that I look at cities. When I go around to different places, I see a lot of the same genetic material here in Missoula that we have in Asheville. So if you think of me as a baby, this is how I started my life, right, when I had hair. And this is what I'm going to eventually become, right? And we think of our families the same way. There's material in you that becomes your grandfather or grandmother. Or more importantly, I look at this guy here, my dad, and I've got 2 genetic issues. I'm genetically Italian, so I like to eat a lot. Our family also suffers a predisposition to heart disease. So when my dad had his 6 bypass heart surgery, it wasn't really much of a surprise to us. But that's something that I have to keep in my mind as I go to the future, as I grow to become my father and my grandfather. I will have this problem. So I have to eat right, I have to exercise, I have to not have the bacon, although I had some this morning, I'll confess. But as Missoula grows, you all are in position to think about the genetic material you have before you and to have models of your grandparents. And it's good to see that you're doing that planning and you're putting those plans in place. So here's Asheville. It's out in the mountains of western North Carolina. We're about 2 hours east of Knoxville and 2 hours west of Charlotte. This is how Asheville started, as a settlement in the mountains. This is a shot down Main Street in the late 1800s. And 30 years after this picture was taken, actually about 25 years, the same shot became this. We like to say that the 3 T's made Asheville: trains, tourism, and tuberculosis. Once the train lines had access to this part of the mountains, it basically funneled the tourism industry from the Northeast, and many people came to Asheville for the clean mountain air. We had the second trolley car line in the entire country. Presidents came to visit. Presidents still come to visit. We had Obama there last year. And during the 1920s, we grew in population by 20% every year through that decade. We achieved the highest debt per capita of the entire country. We were number one. And it's probably not what we need to be number one in, but we were. We were the second largest city in North Carolina. We were larger than Charlotte. When the Depression hit and our books were audited, we thought we had $5 million in the bank. It turned out we had $18,000 in the bank. Our city council was indicted. 3 days after the indictment, the mayor committed suicide. Imagine yourselves in that position.
Where are you going with this story?
Well, how much do you have in the bank? So this is what Thomas Wolfe, is a famous author, is a native of Asheville. This is what he had to say about his hometown. Asheville has squandered fabulous sums. They've flung away the earnings of a lifetime. They've mortgaged those of a generation to come. They've ruined a city, and in doing so, they've ruined themselves, their children, and their children's children. And I'll tell you, we're still dealing with this in Asheville, the children's children who are still there, who are still resistant to debt, who are still resistant to the downtown, who are still resistant to change. This is still a problem in our community. Now, one of the things that was kind of interesting about that debt is when the New Deal program came out, and basically the original stimulus package was the New Deal program, in which a lot of southern cities were absolved of their debts that they took on during their growth in the 20s. Asheville, in a very proto-Tea Party move, didn't take that money. So we paid off that debt. It took us from 1932 until 1976 to pay off all those bonds. Because we couldn't afford, or because we couldn't get those bonds off our books, we had an awful credit rating. One of the reasons why Asheville didn't change from 1930 to 1980 was because we couldn't afford to do anything. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse in a way. And what I think is kind of funny about this, and this is so Asheville in a way, I think Ellen might laugh about this, but it didn't even make the headline. After 50 years of being in debt, it was the third story behind abortions and something about somebody dying in a fire in a prison. That should tell you something about the place of Asheville. So after we cleared our debt, we started catching up to other cities on a rampant fire. We cut the crosstown expressway through the heart of downtown and its northern neighborhoods, and the coup de grace was blowing the mountain open on the east side of downtown with the Bowcatcher Cut. That afforded the mall to happen on the outside of downtown, and our downtown died. Is this a familiar story? Have you experienced this? This happened all across the country. We are not alone in this. These are shots of downtown Asheville in the 1990s. Wouldn't you love to be here? This is what I like to tell people is the pedestrian is a canary in a coal mine to any successful downtown. If you don't see people, pretty much the downtown's dead. It's not rocket science. But count the pedestrians here. Wouldn't you love to visit Asheville and drop your money here? Isn't this exciting? We had all of these buildings. We were too poor to tear them down. So they just sat there vacant, all these upper stories. Our answer was aluminum. We just covered them up with aluminum and forgot about them, hoping that they'd just disappear. Has anybody seen a pedestrian yet? It's crazy. This is what Asheville was like not only 20 years ago. And anytime somebody tried, those children's children would rise up like a Greek chorus and say, that'll never work here, don't even try. We can't be, insert your name of the city here. Don't make us be Portland. Don't make us be whatever. We can't do that. And that was the attitude of Asheville. And it still is in some camps. So the people that did try, the first most key person is John Lancius. And what had happened is this is a proposal in the 90s, or 80s, to do a downtown mall. Some Charlotte developer wanted to rip out a big chunk of downtown and do a mall. A lot of that property was John's. He came home from Vancouver, British Columbia to defend his family's property, and this went on voter referendum because of the bonds, and it lost 70-30. So the community rose up and shot the bonds down, and that changed the political culture of the community. What we had was the mayor and the city council at the time shifted gears and went toward a predominant focus on downtown. And it wasn't, as you know, an effort isn't just one person. There are a lot of volunteers. There are a lot of civic-minded spirited community people, and there's a lot of staff. The city manager, Doug Bean, and Leslie Anderson were the key people on city staff. Leslie was essentially the BID director, but in-house of the city. On the private sector side, we had Roger McGuire. Roger, who's up here in the upper left, we had the luck of having Roger move to Asheville. He was a executive editor of Southern Living magazine. He'd been all around the South, and he figured, we can do something cool here. These buildings are awesome. Why can't we be Savannah? But he was trying to lift up people psychologically. He was trying to lift people's spirits up about they could be a good city. So he would sponsor work sessions out of his own pocket. He sponsored a kids training program where these school kids were taken around downtown and taught about the architecture that the community had. Those kids are now in leadership positions inside the city. They've grown up. But the key thing that Roger did was he converted this building into residential. So he proved that there was a residential market in the downtown. Our firm came in behind that with Julian Price. Julian retired to Asheville. He'd inherited some money, and he wanted to create a for-profit real estate development company that did the right thing. So his money is a revolving fund. 75% of it we invest in buildings, 25% we reserve for investing in entrepreneurs. So we find people with crazy ideas and we get behind them. One of which was the first vegetarian restaurant downtown. We seeded that, the Laughing Seed, back in, I think, 25 years ago. The Malaprops bookstore is now 30 years old. We own a nightclub. But we're primarily focused on the residential above, these in the upper stories. So this is one of our properties before and after. These are 400 to 600 square foot apartments. And what I like to tell people is I say, okay, well, who in this room lives in a 400 to 600 square foot apartment? Anyone? Let me change the question. Who in this room has lived in a 400 to 600 square foot apartment? You know, we just realized with the city that we're 80,000 people, surely there's going to be 26 people that would live in a small unit. And the key of a downtown is to have that diversity of units. So that's been 99% leased up ever since. And the other thing is we kind of don't do marketing studies. That question was our marketing study. It saved us $18,000. One of the projects we just finished, actually about 50% of it, this part's now built. We worked with the city and a hotel developer. This is one of our parcels. We were approached by this hotel developer. They wanted to buy it and build this hotel. We took them to the city. The city built a parking garage, stuck the hotel on top of it, and we're building housing on the back side of it and over the other side. To try to make folks understand this in a more simple way, you know, typically, I mean, you all get a lot of documents. You get a lot of information. You get these huge legal agreements and ordinances. What we did is, rather than give you all the public-private legal agreement, which we did, it was like 30-something pages, we also drew this cartoon model to understand how the legal agreement works. So the city has fee simple rights to this parking garage. They own the parking garage. We're kind of light beige here, so we own the air rights over the parking garage. So we basically pay to sit on top of your head. So anyway, this is one of the tools. Is what I'm trying to show you is that communicating public policy is half the battle of understanding public policy. The other key thing about Julian was he was a communicator, and this is what Asheville looked like at the time he was kicking around. It wasn't all that great, and he had his own newspaper, and this is one of his articles in his newspaper. It's this quote was in this one article, which says, "Among cities with no particular recreation appeal, those that have preserved their past continue to enjoy tourism. Those that haven't receive almost no tourism at all. Tourism simply doesn't go to a city that's lost its soul." And what's kind of interesting about this, Julian wasn't a big booster of the Convention and Visitors Board. I mean, we're still not even a member of the chamber. But he was trying to reach people about the value of place. And that's what he used this quote about. And I sense that when I come here, too. I sense that soul of the community here in Missoula. What's kind of prescient about that quote from Arthur Frommer is 15 years later, this is the same location, Asheville would be voted as the number 5 place in the country to visit by Frommer's magazine. And this past year, we were listed as number 1 by Fodders. And, you know, we think it's kind of funny that someone would put us at the top of any list. But, hey, if you want to come and spend money in Asheville, knock yourself out. We love it. We get about 3 million visitors a year. So what's happening, though, is how do you communicate this value? How do I communicate to you all and to the citizens in the audience or back at home the economic value of public policy, of these things that you decide at this dais? And I love this image from Ronald Reagan. You know, here he is talking about taxes and the effect of policy. So we have our bill, and then they have their bill. He doesn't even bother putting numbers on the y-axis. He just puts a big dollar sign, right? I mean, that's, how do we have to reach people, right? And so how do we as developers in the downtown reach our community? And I'll tell you, we're hated on both the right and the left. Folks that are on the left side, my friends of mine even, consider because I work in real estate development that somehow I'm a land rapist or something like that. And on the right, because we're downtown, we're somehow subsidized. So we're constantly communicating to our citizens why it benefits both sides. And we try to walk through the middle. So what was happening in the downtown, this is the value when we got started in downtown Asheville. Downtown was worth about $100 million. These first two steps here were just by rehabbing buildings. Now, we're not the only ones that were doing it. There was a number of people that were doing rehabs. But this is showing you the rise of value in that portfolio of downtown property to the community's tax base. This is where you all get your revenue. So just by those first two steps, where by fixing assets that were already there, we started getting new buildings in 2008, and now we're over $700 million worth of value. Now that's where you get your revenue. So this is one of the buildings that we rehab, ground story retail, second floor office, upper stories residential. And the city came in and subsidized our building. I'll go ahead and own that right there. We subsidized, or the city subsidized us with a wide sidewalk, a bike rack, a couple benches, and a street tree. But we rehabbed the project, taking it from $300,000 to $11 million of value. So that's a 3,500% increase in that dot that was already there. So in that piece of your community's portfolio, grew by 3,500%. Do y'all have a 401k plan that grows by 3,500%? How about a CD or a bond? You know, this is the power of what you can do to the community's tax base through revitalization. And this is what we had to explain to people. So yes, $25,000 worth of public investment in the streetscape project was at our front door. But the public got a 3,500% return on investment. So there's an environmental benefit to those same units. I'm not going to go too detailed into this. Y'all have this pretty well covered for your community. But for those 19 units that are up there, if they went out into conventional single-family dwelling, they'd consume 39 acres versus 0.2 where they are downtown. Those folks in the downtown drive less than the folks further out. And in our world, we get a lot of CO2 in the summertime because of the humidity in the mountains. So we get a bigger CO2 effect with suburban development. I think you all understand this in this community more so than back east. What I want to focus on for the rest of this presentation is the money. What does it mean for you all in cities? So one of the things that we do is we try to make things apples to apples. And this is our county's tax base return from city single-family residential, county single-family. We like to pick on the Biltmore estate. They get a lovely tax break. But so the average city resident is paying $1,700 an acre in county taxes to our county, while the county is only getting $1,200 out of a county resident. You bring the mall into this, and now you see why an elected official might choose that commercial over residential. Look at that huge gain, up to $8,000 an acre out of the Asheville Mall versus residential, right? So what we do is we say, well, why stop there? Why did you just let me as a developer take you to that argument? Let's go full on to the downtown. And the mixed-use downtown products are in green. Now you see where the mall is at $8,000 an acre. Here's our building at $250,000 an acre. It's 6 stories. And let's say a 6-story building is too tall for y'all. Let's look at the 3 to 4-story building. It's $45,000 an acre in county taxes. So that's the bang for the buck that you get out of that kind of density. So can we look at cities like farmers look at crops? Can we look at land production and how it produces so that you all can afford your goods and services to run a city? And let's take a look at the Walmart, our building downtown, and my house. This is my house, this is my wife, these are my dogs. They're a little weird, they think they're lions, but what people, when they see the Walmart, they get really jacked up about that $20 million worth of value. And that's impressive. But you know, my house is $200,000 worth of value. I pay $2,000 in taxes. I'm on 1/10 of an acre. So my neighborhood, if you took a 1-acre cookie cutter and just dropped it into my neighborhood's producing $20,000 an acre. If you go out to that Walmart and divide its tax bill by the 34 acres it's just consumed of your community, it's paying $6,500 an acre. And look at our building at $634,000 an acre. You know, when I was presenting this in California, this joke kills in California, I said to them, I'm like, look, if you only had an acre to grow a crop in California, what would you want to grow? Wheat, soybeans, or marijuana? You know, it's just, you understand the value of a cash crop. So if you can figure that out from a farm and agriculture standpoint, just apply that to cities. You get a bigger bang for your buck. So let's remove me, because now in this case, this actually doesn't even work for y'all because you don't have retail sales tax. But let's look at retail sales tax in North Carolina. And again, the misnomer is that sales, that we get that kind of value, but that's what all goes back, most of that goes back to Walmart. Our sales tax is 8 cents on the dollar. The city gets a return of 27 cents on that 8 cents. So we get a portion of a portion, or 47,000. So the total tax that Walmart produces is $51,000 an acre. Just the property taxes of our building alone is $330. You had the retail taxes coming out of that building. Now you're cooking with gas, jobs per acre. And one of my friends calls this slide the Moneyball shot of looking at cities. You know, y'all are just a boundary of lands, and this is how we gauge the value that comes back to your community. If you make things apples to apples, you'll make different decisions. So what is your role? What's the role of government? And I'll read this bottom line. Incorporation is the forming of a new corporation. The corporation may be a business, a nonprofit organization, a sports club, or a government of a new city or town. So you all have a corporate charter, right? You're just a boundary of land that gives government services for taxes that I pay. So I moved to Asheville. I became a shareholder in Asheville. I own property. I pay taxes. I'm a corporate citizen. So a city all across the country, every square inch of this country is made up in corporations called counties, with subcorporations called cities. So I like to think of it as a citizen as a shareholder in two corporations, right? So, you know, the conversation with the county is important as well, with Missoula County. And balancing these things out is something rare that I see in cities that they do, where they figure out the cost of different levels of services. I actually saw in the newspaper today the conversation that you all had to have about snow shoveling. You know, for those folks that don't choose to shovel their sidewalk, and then figuring out that cost that's appropriate for all of those government services. So that's nice that you're doing that. I wish that Asheville was that far advanced. We just like to yell at each other instead. But so if we're to balance these things out, if we're to take that level of thinking across the suburban development like this godforsaken place somewhere in Arizona, it really is kind of impressively bad. But as a developer, when I build this, I keep track of every square inch of development that happens, all of my land costs, my permanent costs, my water, my sewer, whatever. But when government gets this thing plugged onto the street, do they do the same thing? Do they check out the cost of police services, fire services? You know, do you all do that? When you penciled out the new retail development at Reserve, did you run the costs of what that will be versus the revenue? So I'm not the first person to talk about this. It's actually the Nixon administration published this document in the 1970s called The Cost of Sprawl, where they're trying to figure out the government effect of different land use patterns. So what would be the revenue and the cost for you all? This was updated in the year 2000 by Rutgers University, in which they took the 24 million households coming into America and what the cost would be, and then what the revenue would be. And then if you applied smart growth, this is your savings, which isn't much. But they only did 30% of their market taking smart growth. But that's still billions of dollars worth of savings. What was more kind of frightening about this chart, does anybody run a business on the dais here? Okay, Councilman Weiner. If the red one was, let's say this one here, if this was your cost of business and this is your revenue, how long are you going to be in business? That's probably about a year. Yeah, and so I called up the researcher and I said, what's up with that? And he goes, well, you know, the rest of it's made up with permits and fees, right? So 24% of the budget is dependent upon permits and fees. So what happens when the music stops? What happens when a recession hits? Now all of a sudden you all have a budget crunch where 25% of your money is gone. And you wonder, well, why isn't there more of a revenue neutral model inside government? Why aren't we looking that way of what things really cost us and balance it against our revenues? And a lot of it's just finding a way to fix your budgets. It's actually, if you have any kind of schadenfreude, which is a German word for finding pleasure in other people's pain, you can go on AP Newswire and type in broken budgets, and you'll find some community that's in worse shape than you. Philadelphia just laid off 200 police officers. That's crazy. So we took the same analysis in Sarasota County, Florida, and they had this document that the state produced where they gauged, and these are real places in Florida, from downtown Orlando to Wellington, which is outside of Palm Beach County. And the more you spread people out, you see this is the public facility cost per dwelling unit. So a resident downtown costs $9,000 of public facilities, and as you spread people out, it goes up to $24,000. And think of it really simply. If you had a mile of pipe and you put 10 people on it, you're dividing that mile of pipe against 10. If you put 1,000 people on it, you're dividing it against 1,000. So your cost goes down because a mile of pipe is a mile of pipe. It is what it is. So we took two forms that we were seeing in Sarasota, urban and suburban, and we found this suburban multifamily at 357 units, and we said, let's do apples to apples replacement cost of these folks in a downtown residential units that were already there. So this is the land cost in an urban form versus a suburban form. So this is the downtown, same 357 units versus the burbs. So it's 10 times the land consumption. It's 57% as much cost to service them on your behalf. Yet you make 830% more money off that urban form versus a suburban form of your cash flow. So if y'all were to run your books the way that we do, our nightclub is on a separate business account from our vegetarian restaurant. We don't let the two intermingle. So if one was to pay one off, so if this was our vegetarian restaurant at $10 million note, and we were paying it off at $240,000 a year, and this was our nightclub, and this is its payout or its return, it takes us 42 years to pay off the infrastructure of a suburban pattern of development versus 3 years in an urban form. So if you all were to keep your books separate about your location of investment, you would have a 2% ROI for a suburban pattern and an 18% ROI for an urban form. So somebody said to me, like, this is a lot of charts, Joe, just show it to me in year 20. So in year 20, Sarasota County has made $34 million off its downtown. They're still in the hole $5 million with the suburban pattern. So this really isn't scary math that I'm doing here. It's kind of simple. You all have the tools here to do that. We've done it all across the country. And this is how it averages out, that we've seen straight across the board, the single-use commercial is pulling about $7 of revenue per acre for every $1 county residents paying in residential. But as soon as you start going up to 2- and 3-story buildings, it really starts exponentially growing. You get a bigger bang for your buck out of that stuff. So in Sarasota, running their numbers, we had to turn their chart sideways because it just got obscene. But this is their Walmart, just a hair above their residential. This is their bad mall. Their bad mall was killed by their good mall. Here's their good mall at 2 times the value of their bad mall. Ignore these 2 bottom bars here for a second and focus on this one. So the good mall is a quarter as much in value as this property. This property is a 2-story building that isn't even occupied on the 2nd floor. If they just spent some time rehabbing that structure, finding a way to get that 2nd floor active, they could push this over $120,000 an acre easily. So this is the analysis that we do are these per acre charts, and I'm going to go into yours and some around Montana. But basically what I want you all to realize, what I'm doing here is I'm trying to get you all to think the way that we think of cars. When we think of cars, we don't think of them on a miles per tank basis, do we? If we did, we'd all be driving Ford F-150s at 650 miles per tank. Instead, we're very cautious about the increment of consumption. And the unit of consumption on a vehicle is a gallon of gas. So if I say what's the miles per gallon instead of miles per tank, the numbers change. I didn't change the vehicles. And we should all be driving BMW Asettas at 70 miles per gallon. You know, so if we're thinking about our land of our community, the acre is that increment that you all control. That's your only asset. You know, you've got a pretty big valley here, but still, that's all you have is the acre of land. And best that I know, an acre of land is still more expensive than a gallon of gas. So if we're doing it for a $4 commodity, we should be doing it for a $40,000 commodity. And trying to get my brain around Montana, I mean, obviously I'm taking some of my East Coast prejudices here when I come here, but Montana is different. It's a different kind of place from back east. Y'all have different policies. One of the things that's kind of interesting, though, is your property tax system actually follows the California property tax revolt of the late 70s. Now California's is a little bit more obtuse than yours, but yours is pretty complex. And you're not alone. After California adopted theirs, it spread like wildfire across the country. Many states changed their tax policies to model themselves after California, which was trying to deal with rampant second home value inflation that was driving real estate values through the roof. So they tried to put some governors in place to slow that down. I grew up in upstate New York, and it was kind of interesting. I remember when I was a kid, these bumper stickers came out that said, to hell with the way they do it in California. And we actually didn't adopt the California model, but it was kind of interesting to see that you all did. And here's how it looks. And I'm not going to go through this in too much detail because it's, again, it is a little bit weird. But you have residential tax and commercial tax. And the residential rate right now, 44% of the house value is being exempted off. So you're only taxing 56% of your house. In the case of commercial, they're removing 19%, so what is that, 81% of a commercial property is taxed. But then there are all of these different rates and numbers that the state checks before it gets to you. And this is, I really hate doing this because this is kind of like silly algebra this late at night, but I try to make a tax policies for dummies, like we were trying to train ourselves in our office how it works. But basically, you've got your house. There's this thing called a CAMA model that the assessors use to figure out what's being sold around your community. And it's this huge computer formula. And then the state takes 6 years of that, what has happened in your market for 6 years, and averages that out, multiplies that times what your house would sell for on the marketplace to come up with an adjusted value of your house. Then the state adjusts another number to take only a portion of that house. So in this case, 44% goes away, 56% of your house gets taxed. Then they come up with another number that's your tax rate that the state sets, and then you all get your hands on the millage rate. That's where at the local level you can cost out your city. I was trying to think of a way to communicate this, and I was thinking in bicycle gears. But so if you view market policy like this chain that moves around, the state makes one gear called the phase-in value, then they make another gear called the exemption rate, then they make another gear called the state set-aside, then they make this other gear called taxable value, and then you all get the big chain ring, which is your millage rate. And these are all the gears that turn to make your valuation. In North Carolina, we only have, we only have 2 gears. We have our assessed value, and we have our millage rate that we can set locally. So it's more simple, it's more streamlined. We also have a whole lot less ability to tweak things. And I think that you all have very sophisticated policy, and I was thinking, well, in a way it's almost like an old equalizer versus a soundboard, that our state is like an old equalizer. We've got 6 knobs. Y'all have hundreds. So it's a little bit more sophisticated here, but you can tweak more things than we can. So you have tax districts. These are your tax district maps. These are things that in California, what we see is they actually change their millages much more variably inside those tax districts. That's something that you all could look into. In Billings, when we ran their numbers, this is their suburban area. They're running basically about $500,000 an acre for their suburban shopping stuff. Their urban stuff starts at around $4 million an acre of value and goes up to about $13 million. And it was an interesting lesson. I mean, I think we all know that in Billings there's these really tall buildings like the Wells Fargo Tower at 15 stories. And when you chart them out, here's that 15-story building producing $43,000 an acre in county taxes. And then this is all of the suburban commercial out here with residential mixed in blue. So you see a very low return. This is if you add that 6-story building in the downtowns, pulling $230,000 an acre, and there's the Wells Fargo building. And it's really impressive. A lot of buildings you wouldn't accept or you wouldn't view as being valuable until you make things apples to apples. So basically 3.9 acres of the building on the left would equal the entire taxable return of the 72 acres on the right. Or in Bozeman, we did the same thing. They've got a couple of skyscrapers at 8 stories. The Baxter Hotel is one of them. And you see it here. But what was kind of crazy about Bozeman, check this out. This is the city residential. And this is the county taxes. So a city resident in Bozeman is paying more taxes to Gallatin County than the Costco, the mall, the Bozeman Shopping Plaza, the Walmart, and the Target. They'd be better off, that county would be better off just producing housing than making all that retail. So 2.2 acres of the building on the left would equal 27 acres of the Walmart on the right. For y'all, it's basically the same thing. We had a lot more fun with you guys because of your beer. Asheville's got a lot of breweries. You have a lot of breweries. This is the bottom map. This is our downtown, and we geolocated all the breweries with these beer cups. But and then this is y'all with your downtown and your breweries. You're 67,000 people. We're 83,000 people. You see that your MSA is a lot more compact. You're 110,000 people. We've got more people out in the hinterlands than you all do. Our downtown's total taxable value is around 670 million. Yours is around 193. But when you get into so you're pulling about $2.5 million an acre of your downtown. 65% of your downtown's taxable, so you've got 35% of it is not taxable. Ours is at around 66%. And that's one of the things that we're focusing on in Asheville is, do we really need to have so much non-taxable land? Can we get some of that back into the tax base? Let's see here. This is Southgate Mall at about 900, let's say $1 million an acre. And what's crazy is the further you go out, you actually start to see a drop in the retail values. So by the time you get to the end of Brook Street, the Walmart that's way out there is only pulling about, let's say $500,000. So it's about half the value per acre of the Southgate Mall. One of the things that was our lesson in looking at what you all have is you really should do a retail or commercial property map to understand how much of your city is in that form of land use, because you don't get a whole lot of revenue out of it. What's interesting, though, is there are some lessons to look to. Once you have a little bit more density, or 2 stories even, like in the Lewis and Clark Shopping Center, it actually pumps up to about $1.2 million an acre. So you're getting more value out of that one, even though it's older. And there's even the older places, like this is I think there's like a drugstore in here, a CVS or something. But this is the old Holiday Village Shopping Center. And this is still, even though has seen better days, it's still pulling about $1.2 million of value per acre. As you get closer to downtown, you have Town and Country Shopping Center at $1.2 million. And then this is kind of interesting. Across the river at Higgins, this little cluster right here is pulling about $7 million an acre. So it's 7 times the value of Southgate Plaza, or Southgate Mall. What was really kind of amazing was to see this Reserve Street stuff. This is $888,000 an acre, and you've consumed 171 acres of your community to get that low return. And you compare that against downtown. So downtown, the core area is about 36 acres. It's pulling about 4.5 million. And by the way, these are both at the same scale, so you can see how much of your community is taken up for each of those, and then the bang for the buck that you get out of them. So you're making about, what is that, about 5.5 to 6 times the value per acre out of your downtown versus the Reserve cluster. So just going through the numbers, again, the Walmart at Reserve is $656 per acre. The Reserve Home Depot is around $700,000 an acre. The Kmart is $758,000 an acre, and Southgate Mall is at $900,000. And just to use the Kmart as a control subject, you see what happens when you have a second story added to part of the mall area. Now your value jumps up, and then the Kmart is beating the Walmart at Reserve. That was pretty amazing. You know, so there's basically, I'll get into why that happens in a second, but you have a legacy of phenomenal architecture in this town. You have a great legacy of place, of buildings that have given you value back for hundreds of years. This is, or over 100 years. This is a building on Higgins that's still currently pulling $2.4 million an acre of value, and as you know, it's not even occupied right now. So when that building gets rehabbed, you're going to see its value jump up. You're going to see a higher level of tax production. Obviously, this building's phenomenal. You know that that's valuable to your community, and it shows in its numbers. It's about $8 million an acre. And the Florence Hotel's pulling about $18 million an acre. And this was kind of interesting. You'll find these, we'll leave the maps behind, but you'll find these little dots all over the place, like this one here. This is the Park Place Apartments at $8 million an acre. Now, who would have thought this would be so high up on the value chain, this far out of downtown? And of course, this was the winner. This is pretty obvious. It's a new building. It's tall. But this is pulling $54 million an acre. So this is 54 times the value per acre of your Southgate Mall. So doing your chart, and I'll walk through all of these, this is Missoula County taxes per acre. So this is what a county resident pays on average in county taxes per acre, about $250 an acre. Here's your Kmart and county taxes per acre, town and country shopping. Incidentally, the TIF districts are outlined in black. So this is another TIF district here, the Holiday Village Shopping, pulling $3,000. A city single-family dweller in Missoula is paying $2,000 an acre in taxes, while the Walmart at Reserve Street's paying, was that about $20 less per acre. So y'all actually are producing more revenue out of your residential than your Walmart. This is Southgate Mall over here at $2,800 an acre, Lewis and Clark at $3,500. Multifamily inside the county and then multifamily inside the city. Now, granted, most multifamily is going to be inside the city limits, but this is the economic value you get out of that density. You're getting about $6,500 an acre. 110 Higgins, this is your downtown average at $14,000 an acre. 200 Higgins, this is the Park Place Apartments. 101 3rd Street. Riverfront Place is kind of a little bit west on Front Street, pulling about $50,000 an acre. This is the Florence Hotel at $60,000 an acre, and then this is 350 Ryman. So again, that bang for the buck that you get out of that density and that value. So when you think of it, that minimizing your footprint environmentally, you're also maximizing your bang for the buck as well. So these are the maps. I'm not going to go through them in detail. Purple is the higher value, and you'll just need more time to look at these. And as you go to lighter colors, that actually is your drop-in value, and gray is exempt. So it's land that's not producing taxes. As you get further out, you see a lot of value by the university, Southgate Mall, and you see low value on the retail street here. All of these yellow parcels are things that could be fixed. I'm just going to get through. These are really abstract and difficult to see, so I'm just going to fly through them. This is Reserve Street, and it shows you all the low value you get out of it in yellow. It's just barely above unbuilt land. And what it is developers, when we build large boxes like that, we're building really, really cheap buildings. And your value of your real estate value is set on your architecture. So the cheaper the building I make, the lower my tax rate. And there's no logical, rational connection between my cost of services and cheap architecture. But that's what ends up happening to you all, is that you get a low return. So basically, this is Reserve stacked against your downtown. Sorry, these are kind of light. But the 171 acres of Reserve is about $152 million of value. Your 37 acres of downtown is more value than that 171 acres at 167 million in total value. So you're getting a bigger bang for your buck. So 1.3 acres of that building on 3rd Street would equal the entire 21 acre Walmart at Reserve, if you're to put them side by side. So think of farming, think of how you use your land, the way that a farmer does and how they spread their resources. If we were to focus on how to pump up the value of your tomato plants rather than your sod, the more that you use your land for growing sod, you're going to get a lower price point of that on the market. Whereas if you focus on your tomato plants or those plants that grow a higher price in the marketplace, you're going to get a bigger bang for your buck. Does that all make sense? And this is all behavioral economics. The reason why we build this junk as developers is because of the policies that are giving us loopholes. And this is Cheyenne. I'll just show you just as an example. You've got two values in your property. You've got your value of your dirt. You've got your value of your building on top of the dirt. If we throw away the building and just make a map of the land value per acre, it would look like, you would think it would look like this, where your house value per acre and the dirt would be the same as all of your neighbors around you. But when you get into the suburban form, you see what's going on up here, This is blue, it's $15,000 an acre. And when I was presenting this in Cheyenne, I said to them, I'm like, what's up with this? $15,000 an acre, and as soon as you cross the street, it goes up to $35,000 an acre. What's up with that? And the county assessor said to me, she goes, you don't understand. And I said, what don't I understand? She goes, well, the more land you have, the lower the assessed value rate we make it. And I said, hold on a second. So if I buy more land of your community and I get more infrastructure, I get 3/4 of a mile of a street here, 3/4 of a mile street here, and half a mile here, you're going to give me a tax bonus as a lower rate of value than my neighbor across the street only has 150 feet of frontage. And she goes, yes. I'm like, so another way of saying it is I'm actually penalized for doing infill and doing downtown stuff, which is what your priority is. And she goes, yes. So think about that. When we think of subsidies, we tend to think of subsidies like I come to a council meeting, I beg and plead you all for a density bonus. We go through some gut-wrenching process where I get yelled at, but we all pass this policy, and I go away with my little bonus, right? Well, just by the way that we set our math, we also set bonuses into the system. So it happens in an invisible way. It happens in a way that's set policy. It's happening in your community. You see the larger tracts of land tend to have lower value. Even when you get into and around the downtown area, the bigger parcels are coming out as orange and the smaller parcels are coming out as red and pinks. So you have that assessment standard going on with you right now. And realize this is just a tax code. It's not delivered by Moses. This isn't something that's infallible. There will be problems that happen with policy. These aren't invisible market forces forcing us to do this. It's all set in policy, and it will shoot yourself in the foot with it. So I use this quote from Mark Twain, which is a person who won't read has no advantage over one who can't read. If y'all aren't understanding your tax policies and understanding the effect that it has on your physical environment, you're not going to be successful with your smart growth policies or any other policies that you adopt to be more efficient. So realize that some policies will tip the scale in a certain way. Incidentally, I used Google image and I typed in government putting thumb on scale, and this popped in, so I had to use it. So we didn't emerge from the savannah with tax policy. It's not genetic to us. And in England, for about 100 years, you were taxed on the number of windows you had, and people started boarding up their windows to avoid the taxes. In France, you were taxed below your roof line, and this crafty architect, Francois Mansart, came up with this way of sticking stories up in the roof, and that's the term mansard roof. And when the tax assessor came out, he goes, you cannot tax me for that. That is clearly the roof, right? It's a tax loophole. So when you look at your landscape and you realize that this is your community, it's your grandchildren have to live in this community, and you're adopting policies that will change the shape of your community, you have every ability to tweak those policies. And I like to end with this quote from Winston Churchill, which is, we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. So hopefully it's helped you understand the effect of what's going on. Thank you. Good. Questions?
Thank you. Are there any questions? Bob.
Thanks. It's interesting stuff. Do you have any numbers or any assessment about the relationship of costs for government services in the different land forms? I would imagine there's some mitigating numbers there as far as the cost of providing services, not necessarily infrastructure services, but like police and fire and whatnot. Yeah, with the relationship to density.
Yeah, we don't get into them because with this study, this was kind of like a first brush of paint. Mm-hmm. Hopefully this leads to that conversation of, well, what do you do next? There are studies out there. There's actually numerous studies, but we try to do this as kind of like a quick take. I'd have to turn to either Ellen or Rod.
And then another piece of that would be trying to look at it from the property owner perspective in terms of the retail value of, say, big box sales per square foot as compared to downtown retail. You know, if we're going to say your taxable value should be this much, well, you know, how do those numbers compare?
Yeah, there's people ask me like, well, how do you solve this problem? What do you do to deal with this dilemma? In the case of when we were talking in Bozeman, one of the things that they've implemented in Bozeman is impact fees. And you know, we were just kind of having a discussion, and it's kind of great that they have impact fees because I'm not enabled to use those in North Carolina. It's illegal to do that for some reason, and we don't know why, but it is. But in the case of Bozeman, I asked them if they have impact fees in their downtown. And they said, but of course. I said, so wait a minute, you want to build in your downtown, you want to grow up in your downtown, but you're also going to impact fee that. If anything, the infrastructure is already there. Did you gauge in the fact that that infrastructure is amortized its way out 100 years ago? And they said no. So could you set a cost sector, understand what your community costs? Again, there's economics firms that do this all over the place. I don't know how you run your budget system and how detailed you have the numbers. In reports that I've seen from back east, there's one that was done in Massachusetts where they ran the public cost on retail. And what they found was that in one Walmart, the Walmart was yielding $230,000 in total property taxes, yet it was costing the community $180,000 in police services for that one Walmart. So just the police services on that one Walmart, the amount of calls that were going out there with the police department was consuming most of the property tax. And again, I don't know how you all do your budgeting and account for that, but that would be a conversation with your city manager. I'm sure they have some numbers that would get close to that. But there are some national studies that are out there that you can use as well. Like we used that state study from Florida in Sarasota to run their costs.
I have Jason, and then Cynthia, and then Alex, and then I'm going to ask for some public comment.
Thanks for the presentation. Like Bob says, it's interesting stuff. First, a comment about the impact fees, because I see eyes lighting up in the audience. And as people may or may not know, our impact fee law is pretty prescriptive in the way that you have to adopt them. And so when we initially adopted them, we adopted it. It's limited to cost recovery, and then basically a percentage of documented cost. Because we implemented the impact fees citywide, the cost was essentially averaged over each kind of development in each different zone. We've since broken out the downtown area and documented a lower cost, lower impact for that area, and resulting in a lower fee. Okay. But in order to really use the tool to actually capture costs from various areas, we'd have to sort of adopt them by district, which might be a smart policy thing to do. I think at the time we were just happy to get them in place. The question that I had was about the maps that showed the relationship, I think, between parcel size and assessed value, or maybe they didn't really show. Could you back up to one of those? So this is.
The Cheyenne one's more vivid.
Okay, so that's assessed value per acre.
Of the land.
Of the land, of just the land.
So you've got your house, but there's the dirt under your house.
Right, so it's not just based on. So I thought the value of improvements might have had something to do with it, but that makes sense. Where are there places where the maps don't look like this?
Nowhere. Oh. Get into Vermont or something like that, or maybe we just did Maine last week, and we saw the same thing in Maine. It's a standard. In fact, one of the reasons why I made that Moses slide is because it was so utterly confounding that the assessor would straight face say, well, the more land you have, the lower the value. And I kept on asking, I'm like, why is it that way? And did y'all see the movie Babe the Talking Pig?
Just the second one, Babe Pig in the City.
The first one, the first one's much better than Babe Pig in the City. But although there is a metaphor there. But anyway, when the pig was talking with the cows just kept on saying, well, it's just the way things are. And every time I talked with the assessors, I actually presented this at the National Assessment Conference. And it's just something they hadn't considered. And what's kind of mind-blowing is not necessarily the assessors, but it's we as planners have never bridged that silo to talk with them. And it's very common that a planning department won't talk with the assessors department, and we just don't understand their cash game. And when I started practicing planning, it was pretty commonplace to find 2.5 parking spaces per residential unit in any city you went to. And if you asked any planner, they would just say, well, that's just the way things are. And over time, we figured out that that's actually damaging cities, so we started changing tax or zoning ordinances to tweak that one assessment. So could the same thing happen with your assessor? I don't know where the line is between your state and your assessors, but starting that conversation with your local county assessor to figure out how many of these same standards are in place and understanding what are things that you can tweak or what you can't. And if you can't tweak it at an assessment level, could you do it with impact fees, or could you modify your millage rates in your tax districts to cover the costs? But I think that that's the conversation, is getting your costs in order.
Mr. Minicozzi, thank you so much for joining us. We're out of time.
Okay.
Ms. Wolkin, would you like to ask your question?
It's okay. I had a parking question, but I'll pass.
Can you guys visit afterwards?
Yes.
Great. I think we have your contact information for Mr. Austin, and appreciate this opportunity. We're adjourned.